They said she just stopped talking. No warning, no cry for help, no goodbye. One moment, Chloe was a bright little girl who wouldn't stop humming her mother's lullabies. And the next, she was a ghost in her own skin. Eyes open, mouth shut, heart hiding somewhere no one could reach. It started the night her mother died. A car accident, instant, unfair, and loud enough to break a little girl's world into pieces she didn't know how to hold. Her father, Dylan, tried to stay strong. He told everyone she just needed time. But the weeks turned to months. And Chloe never said a word. Not at school, not at home, not to him. At night, she'd sit by the window, not watching, not waiting, just staring. Like she was listening for something no one else could hear. Dylan wasn't rich, just a delivery driver with tired hands and a heart that had forgotten how to ask for help. He couldn't afford the fancy doctors, but he tried anyway. Therapists, speech specialists, art therapy, even those animal-assisted ones with golden retrievers and smiles. Still nothing, just silence, beautiful, terrifying, endless silence. He bought her toys she didn't touch, told stories she didn't hear, sat beside her in the dark and begged, quietly, shamefully, for her to come back, not to the world, just to him. But she wouldn't. And the truth he couldn't admit? Maybe she was waiting for a voice that didn't sound like his. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of day where nothing feels important until everything changes. Dylan had taken a delivery route he normally avoided, an old nursing home at the edge of the city. He hated it there. The air always smelled like boiled vegetables and forgotten stories, but he needed the overtime. He signed in, dropped off the package and turned to leave. That's when he heard it. A voice, old, raspy, but soft like velvet. It floated through the hallway like a lullaby wrapped in dust, and the stars came out just like her eyes, always too bright to stay angry for long. He froze, not because of the words, but because it sounded like her, like Chloe's mother. Not the pitch, not the exact tone, but the way she used to speak when she tucked Chloe into bed, when love was the only language they knew. He followed the voice, slowly, almost afraid to believe. In a sunlit corner room he found her. An old woman, blind, sitting by herself, whispering to the empty air as if the walls were listening. Her name was Esther, and when Dylan asked who she was talking to, she smiled gently and said, "Someone who doesn't talk back but still needs to be heard." Something cracked inside him. That night, he sat beside Chloe as usual, but this time, he didn't tell a story. He asked her a question. "What if someone else read to you tomorrow?" She didn't answer, but for the first time in months, she blinked twice, and that was enough. The next day, Dylan returned, not with a toy, not with medicine, but with a voice. Esther entered the apartment slowly, her cane tapping gently on the floor like a second heartbeat. She couldn't see Chloe, but somehow she knew exactly where the silence was hiding. Chloe sat on the couch, arms wrapped around a stuffed animal with no name. Her eyes followed the sound of Esther's steps, but her lips stayed sealed, like always. Dylan stood in the doorway, unsure, afraid. What if this was just another dead end? But Esther didn't rush. She didn't ask Chloe to speak. She just smiled and said, "You know, I used to know a little girl who refused to speak too. Not because she couldn't, but because no one listened the way she needed them to." Then she began telling a story. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft, warm, timeless, about a bird who forgot how to sing until it heard a melody that sounded like home. Chloe didn't move, didn't blink, but her breathing slowed, her shoulders relaxed. And for the first time in months, she wasn't just present, she was listening. Esther spoke for 20 minutes straight, pausing only once to sip some tea. When she finished, she leaned closer and whispered, "If you ever want to finish the story with me, I'll be right here." And then she left. Chloe didn't say a word. But that night, when Dylan tucked her in and turned off the light, she held his hand, tight, like she didn't want him to let go. It was small, almost nothing. But to a father losing hope, it felt like the first sunrise after a year of storm. It wasn't a word, not a sentence, not even a whisper. But to Dylan, it was everything. The next afternoon, Esther returned with a scarf wrapped around her shoulders and a memory tucked into her voice. She didn't greet Chloe like a guest. She greeted her like someone who'd been waiting for her all along. "Do you remember the story we started?" she asked softly, settling into the armchair near the window. No answer. But Chloe turned her head just slightly toward the sound. Esther continued. "This time it was about a girl who lost her shadow. She searched high and low through dreams and thunder until a woman with silver hair taught her how to call it back. Halfway through the tale, Esther stopped. Her voice caught in her throat, and she coughed. Once, then twice. She pressed a hand to her chest, embarrassed. And in the stillness that followed, something happened. From the couch came a sound. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. A giggle. Tiny, uncertain but real. Esther froze. Dylan dropped the glass he was holding. Even Chloe seemed surprised by her own voice. Tears welled in Dylan's eyes before he could stop them. He covered his mouth like he was afraid to break the moment. Esther smiled but said nothing. She simply looked in Chloe's direction and whispered, "I missed that part of the story too." And in that moment they all understood. Healing doesn't always begin with words. Sometimes it starts with a single breath, wrapped in laughter. Some voices don't need to be loud to be life-changing. They just need to sound like love. The next few visits were different. Chloe didn't speak again, but she didn't hide anymore either. She sat closer, listened longer. Her eyes followed every word Esther said, like her heart was relearning the language it had once locked away. But Dylan, he still hadn't heard his daughter say anything to him. Every night he practiced what he'd say if she ever spoke first. Every morning he woke up aching with silence. Until one evening, cold, quiet, and nearly forgotten by the world, Esther changed the story. She didn't begin with Once Upon a Time. She began with a lullaby, the same one Chloe's mother used to hum at bedtime, soft and shaky, but unmistakable. Dylan's chest tightened. That lullaby hadn't been heard since the night of the accident. He never dared sing it, not once. Chloe blinked fast. Her lip trembled. She clutched the hem of her sweater like she was holding onto the edge of a cliff. Then her mouth moved and a word fell out. "Mum?" One word, whispered like it had been hiding in the dark for months. Dylan knelt beside her, unable to breathe, and Chloe turned to him. Her eyes, wet and wide, finally met his. She opened her mouth again, but before she could speak, she burst into tears. Not silent tears, but loud, shaking, gasping sobs that broke the air apart. Dylan didn't try to stop her. He held her like a father holding his child for the very first time. And Esther? She sat quietly in the corner, hands folded, tears glistening beneath blind eyes. That night the silence ended, not with words, but with weeping. And somehow, that was more than enough. The tears didn't stop her, they freed her. For the first time in 6 months, Chloe wasn't trapped in silence. She was swimming through it, messy, trembling, but alive. That night, after Esther left and the apartment grew quiet again, Dylan tucked her in just like he used to. But this time, Chloe didn't turn away. She reached out and grabbed his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered. He froze. That one word in her voice felt like the world turning back on its axis. "Yes, baby," he managed, voice cracking. There was a long pause. Chloe's lip trembled again. Her eyes searched his face, as if looking for the courage she'd buried there long ago. Then she asked the question, the one she'd carried like a weight on her chest for half a year. Was it my fault?" Dylan's heart shattered. All this time, every quiet stare, every sleepless night, every word she never said, had been soaked in guilt. She thought the accident was her fault. Because she dropped her toy in the back seat, because her mum turned around for 1 second, because that 1 second took everything. Dylan pulled her into his arms, holding her tighter than he ever had. "No," he whispered. "No, baby, not even close. Nothing about that was your fault." She buried her face in his shirt, and for a long time, neither of them said anything. Because some truths don't need to be explained, they just need to be held. And in that moment, Chloe wasn't just healing. She was forgiving herself. She wasn't supposed to say anything. She had promised herself no past, no pain, no pieces of a story long buried. But healing has a strange way of loosening what silence once held tight. The next morning, when Esther returned, Chloe met her at the door. No hiding, no staring through her. Just standing there, waiting. She didn't say much, just "Hi." And that one word was enough to make Esther's old hands tremble slightly on her cane. They sat by the window. Chloe asked if they could finish the bird story, the one about the song that brought the shadow back. Esther smiled, but her eyes, they glistened in a way Chloe hadn't seen before. As she began, her voice softened, slower than usual, like each word had to walk through memory to reach her lips. But halfway through, Esther stopped. She placed a hand over her chest, breathed in deep, and whispered, "You remind me of someone." Chloe tilted her head, curious. Esther continued quietly now, "I once had a daughter just like you." Dylan looked up from the kitchen. He'd never heard Esther speak of her family before. She was bright, brave, but quiet. After her father left, and when the world didn't notice her sadness, she swallowed it. Chloe's eyes widened. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. Esther's voice cracked. She stopped talking, just like you, until one day she didn't come back. Silence filled the room. Esther had never told this story, not to anyone. Not since the day they buried a little girl with too much pain and too few words. Tears slid down her wrinkled cheek. "I think that's why I came," she said. "Not just for you, Chloe, but for her, for the voice I never saved." Dylan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And Chloe?" She stood up, crossed the small room and hugged Esther without a word. Because sometimes the deepest thank you is quiet. And in that embrace, something passed between them. A grief shared, a promise rewritten, a voice reclaimed. She didn't want to do it. The idea of standing in front of strangers, of using the voice she had once buried so deep it nearly disappeared, was terrifying. But Esther asked, not with pressure, not with guilt, just with hope. "There's a little girl at the centre," she told Chloe one afternoon. "She hasn't spoken in weeks. Her mother's worried, like yours was." Chloe didn't answer right away. She just sat there, holding the drawing she'd made of a bird flying out of a dark tunnel. Esther leaned closer. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But if you ever want to show her that silence doesn't last forever, maybe she'll listen to you." That night, Chloe sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. She picked up a pencil, then stopped, then tried again. By morning there was a story, short, simple, true. She brought it with her to the centre. Dozens of families sat in folding chairs, talking softly, waiting for the weekly gathering to begin. Dylan held Chloe's hand, his palm sweating. When her name was called, she almost didn't stand. But then she looked across the room and saw a girl, curled up, silent, afraid, just like she had been. So Chloe walked to the front. No microphone, no podium, just her and the paper in her shaking hands. She looked at Esther, then at her dad. And then slowly, carefully, she began to read. "My name is Chloe. I didn't talk for 6 months. People thought I was broken, but I wasn't. I was scared and sad, and I didn't know how to say that." She paused, tears in her eyes. The room was frozen in stillness. "But someone talked to me like I mattered, even when I didn't answer, and little by little I came back." She looked at the girl in the back and smiled gently. "I don't know your story, but I know what it feels like to be quiet, and I just wanted you to know I hear you, even if you don't say a word." For a moment no one breathed. Then applause, not wild, not loud, but steady and full of something sacred. Dylan wiped his eyes. And Esther? She closed hers, as if listening to the echo of her own daughter in every syllable Chloe spoke. It began with a whisper, but Chloe was ready for more. After the speech, something shifted, not just in her, but around her. Kids started looking at her differently, not with pity, but with quiet awe, like she had walked through a storm and come back with a map. One of them, a boy named Matteo, slipped her a note. "I don't talk either, but maybe you could tell me another story." She smiled, not because she was brave, but because she understood. Every word she spoke now carried someone else's silence with it. That night, Chloe sat with Esther and Dylan at the table. She pulled out her sketchbook, flipped past the birds and lullabies, and opened to a blank page. Then she asked the question no one saw coming. "Can I name it?" Esther tilted her head. "Name what, sweetheart?" Chloe tapped her chest. "The silence." Dylan leaned forward, confused. "What do you mean?" Chloe took a breath. "I think if I name it, it won't feel like it owns me anymore." Esther smiled, like someone watching the sunrise after too many cloudy days. "And what name would you give it?" she asked gently. Chloe thought, really thought. Then she wrote one word on the page. Shadow. Not evil, not scary, just always there. "The silence was like a shadow," she said softly. "It followed me, but it wasn't me." Dylan's eyes welled up. Esther reached out, placing her hand over Chloe's. "And now?" she asked. Chloe looked up, eyes bright. "Now I know how to walk in the light." And just like that, the girl who didn't speak became the girl who gave others a way back to their voice. All stories come full circle, but the best ones leave something behind. Months passed. Chloe kept writing, not just for herself, but for every child still trapped in their own silence. She called her little project the Voice Box. It wasn't fancy, just a small shelf at the community centre where kids could drop drawings, poems, or letters they couldn't say out loud. Some were messy, some made no sense, but all of them mattered. And every week Chloe would pick one and read it out loud. One afternoon, after reading a letter from a boy who missed his mum but couldn't cry, Chloe noticed Esther sitting alone on the bench outside. Her hands trembled, her breaths were slower, tired. Chloe sat beside her and whispered, "Can I tell you a story?" Esther smiled. "I'd like that very much." So Chloe began, Not with a fairy tale, but with the story. The one about a little girl who thought she'd lost everything, until a stranger spoke to her with a voice that felt like home. Esther listened, eyes closed, lips gently curved into a smile. When Chloe finished, there were tears on Esther's cheeks. "I was never strong enough to save my daughter," she said softly. "But maybe I was strong enough to help you." Chloe hugged her tightly. "You didn't just help me," she whispered. "You gave me back my voice." And that night, Esther passed peacefully in her sleep, holding Chloe's story beneath her hand. At her memorial, Dylan spoke. Chloe stood beside him, one hand on his arm, the other holding a piece of folded paper. When he was done, she stepped forward, and in front of the same crowd she once feared, she read a letter. "To the woman who saw me when I couldn't speak. Thank you for reminding me that silence isn't the end. It's just the part before someone chooses to listen." She placed the letter inside a wooden box labelled "For the Next Quiet Heart" and walked away, her head held high, her shadow behind her. Because now she didn't just have a voice. She had a purpose. Sometimes people don't need answers. They just need someone who will stay, who will sit beside them in the quiet and listen without rushing. Chloe didn't need the best doctor or the smartest words. She needed a voice that felt safe, one that reminded her she wasn't alone. And Esther, she couldn't change her past, but she chose to help someone else heal. That's the kind of quiet strength that changes lives. What I loved most about this story is how real it feels. There's no magic, no miracle machines, just people, honest, hurting, trying. A tired father who never gave up, an old woman who turned her regret into love, and a little girl who slowly found her way back, not through pressure but through patience and kindness. It reminds me that sometimes healing isn't loud, it's slow, soft, and shared. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this story. If it touched you, even just a little, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've ever been the quiet one, or the person who stayed beside someone in silence, you're stronger than you know. Until next time, take care and keep listening for the voices that matter.